26th of November, Rabbi Furst, Parsha Hashavua Yeseshev.
Beautiful.
Morning. How's everyone?
Good morning.
Morning. Good morning, Lou. Good morning, Roy. 1 second. I'm just trying to.
Good morning, Rabbi Furst.
Good morning. How are you, Roy?
Baruch Hashem. Good morning, Yechiel, and good morning, Lo.
Okay. I might be interrupted. There might be a workman coming in, so we'll see. If we get interrupted, you'll know. So, okay. Good morning. This is Rabbi Shlomo Furst here. Yeshiva Samanapshi here. And Yerushalayim Care of Zoom. This is in Shabbos, Parshas Yeseshev, and we'll be discussing a few important points about the Parsha. Good. If you like, you can direct your attention to in Parak. We're going to discuss a Rashi here. That's where we'll begin.
What is that?
In Parak Lamed Zayin 37. And it's in Pasuk Lamed Gimel. Lamed Gimel. Let's see. Right. Let's see, maybe we can tell you what. Let's just start reading a few psukim to begin with. Good morning, man.
Good morning.
Okay. We're if you want to direct your attention in the Chumash there in Parshas Vayeshev, Perek Lamed Zayin 37, and we'll start maybe with the Pasuk Lamed Aleph. Pasuk Lamed Aleph. And, we'll read a few psukim just to get a picture of what the Parsha is discussing over here.
Should I read?
Yes, if you like, Lou, go ahead.
Okay. Vayikhu es ketones Yosef, vayish chatu sa'ir izim, v'yitbelu es hakutones badam. Okay, so that is they took Yosef's coat and they slaughtered a male goat and they dipped the coat in the blood. Vayishalchu es ketones hapasim vayaviu el avihem vayamaru zos matzanu hakar na haketones bin cha he im lo. They sent the coat, the colorful coat, and brought it to their father and said, "We found this. Please identify it. Is it the coat of your son or not?" Vayakira Vayomer Katones Beni Chaya ra'a achalashu. Toraf Yosef. He recognized it and he said, that the coat of my son, an evil beast has devoured him. Yosef has been torn up. Vayikra Yaakov Simlosav Vayasem Sak B'masnav Vayis Abel Al Beno Yamim Rabim. Yaakov tore his clothes and he put sackcloth on his loins, and he mourned for his son many days.
Okay, let's stop and take a look at Rashi here for a moment on this pasuk, right? Lamed Daled. Rashi says Yamim Rabim.
Okay, let me find it. Okay, Yamim Rabim, many days. Kaf Bet, 24 Shana. I'm sorry, 22
Right.
years. Mishe Perash Mimenu. From that which was left to him.
He was separated from him. He said the pasuk says that Yaakov Avinu was in mourning over Yosef for literally many days, which Rashi says that it really means the 22 years that he was separate from him until Yarad Yaakov Mitzrayim, until Yaakov eventually went down to Mitzrayim, and there Yosef was discovered. After they had discovered Yosef.
I see. Separated. Ad Sheyarad Yaakov Mitzrayim, until Yaakov went down to Mitzrayim. Shina Emar, as it says, Yosef ben Shiva Esrei Shana Bego. As it says, Yosef was 17 years old, etc. Uben Shloshim Shana Haya, and he was 30 years old. Be'amdo lifnei Paro, when he stood before Paro. V'sheva shnei hasava. And there were 7 years of plenty. Ushna sa'im ha'ra'av. And there were 2 years of hunger. Kisheba Yaakov leMitzrayim, at the time when Yaakov came to Mitzrayim. Hare Kaf Bet Shana, behold, 22 years. Keneged Kaf Bet Shana, corresponding to 22 years. Shalo Kiyem Yaakov, that Yaakov did not fulfill Kivut Avim, honoring his father and his mother.
So up until now, Rashi's just explaining how we get to the tally of 22 years. And at the end here, he mentions also that it was equivalent to the same amount of time that Yaakov Avinu did not fulfill his mitzvah of Kivut Avim. Okay.
Kaf Shana Beves Lavan, 20 years in the house of Lavan. Ubeis Shanim Baderech, and 2 years on the road. Beshuvo Mi Beis Lavan, when he returned from the house of Lavan. Shana v'chetzi b'Sukkos, 1.5 years in Sukkos, v'shisha chadashim b'Beis El, and 6 months in Beis El, v'zehu she'amar leLavan, and this was what he said to Lavan, Ze li esrim shana b'veisecha. These, to me, 20 years in your house.
Right,
I have been in your house for 20 years.
right. And then there were the 2 years of returning. So that brought a total of 22 years. So that was the amount of time that Yaakov Avinu was in Avelis, in mourning over the loss of his son Yosef. We didn't really know was really alive and well, sometimes better off than others, but he was alive there in Mitzrayim. And Rashi also explains in another place that the whole time that Yaakov Avinu was in mourning, so the Shekhinah wasn't present by him. The presence of the Kadosh Baruch Hu, that a person, there are certain things that a person has to have, certain prerequisites that the Shekhinah should be shora, he should be present by a person. And one of them is the person should be simcha. He should be in a state of joy. And if a person's not in a joyful state, so then it's not, he doesn't have the privilege of the Shekhinah being with him. So since he was in Avelis, he was in mourning for these 22 years, he was missing out on the Shekhinah, the presence of the Kadosh Baruch Hu, dwelling with him for those 22 years, which obviously to a person like Yaakov Avinu, that meant quite a lot. The fact that he didn't have the benefit and the benefits and the bliss of having the Shekhinah by him. So that was very significant. Now let's take a look at another pasuk here.
I'd like to ask a question.
Yeah.
How can he be mourning for 22 years? It says that the Avos follow the Torah, and Torah says you mourn for 1 year.
Right. So Rashi's going to address that point. Rashi will get to that in that will be in let's see another pasuk or two. Lamed Hey. Yeah, pasuk Lamed Hey. Answer to your question will be in pasuk in Rashi Lamed Hey.
Okay, Vayikumu chol banav v'chol banosav le'nachamo vayemaer lehisnachem vayomer ki ered el bini avel shaol vayevk oso aviv. So let's see. They arose, all of his sons and daughters arose to console him, but he refused to be consoled. He said, I will go down as a mourner for my son to the grave, and his father wept for him.
Right. Oh, so let's go through the Rashis here, and you'll see the answer to your question here.
Okay. B'chol benosav, all his daughters. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda says, Achayos somos noldu im kol shevet va shevet. A twin sister was born for each tribe, for each and every tribe.
Meaning when Reuven was born, there was a daughter born as a twin with Reuven, and same with Shimon, Levi, all the way down the line. Each one of the brothers that was born, they had a sister born with them as well. That's why it makes reference to the daughters here as well. Usually you don't really see any mention of the daughters at all. But here the Torah goes out of its way to mention that the daughters also were involved in trying to comfort Yaakov Avinu.
They were twins.
Yeah, that's right. Everyone, Reuven, Shimon, Levi, right? Everyone, all the brothers had a twin born along with them.
Wow.
Yeah. And they intermarried. The other brothers married their sister. They intermarried, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Technically half sisters, I think,
Yeah.
because they were born of other mothers.
Correct. That's right. Exactly, man. Very good.
Unisa'um, and each married one. Rabbi Nehemiah Omer ki na nios hayu. Rabbi Yechemna says they were Canaanites. Ella mahu v'chol bino sav. Rather, or then what? All of the daughters. What does it mean when it says all of the daughters? If Rabbi Nehemiah says that the wives of the brothers were Canaanites, I guess, and if so, why does it talk about the daughters? Kalosav, his daughters-in-law, it means.
That's right. Not literally. The first shot was literally daughters, and then the next shot is that they were the daughter-in-laws, which it also can fit into the expression of daughters as well.
She'ein adam nimna, that a person does not hesitate, kilik ro lachataso beno, to call his son-in-law his son, ule chalaso bito, and his daughter-in-law his daughter. Okay. There's a lot of questions we could ask on that, but let me finish reading it, and then we can see how many questions you're going to allow me to ask.
All right. Good.
Vayima'ain lehisnachem. He refused to be consoled. Ein adam mikabel tanchumim. A person cannot accept consolation al hachai b'savur shemes, on one who is alive but thought to be dead.
Right. So this is basically the answer to your first question, right? That that a person, you were asking, why did Yaakov Avinu engage in Avelis mourning for such a long time? Because as Rashi says here, a person doesn't receive and accept consolation over someone who's alive, and in a case where he thought he was dead, which was the case of Yosef. Yosef was in fact alive. So therefore, there was not an ability to actually receive and be comforted over these consolations, because they were not really true consolations. It was true that Yosef was separated from his family and from his father, and he was in great danger. But nevertheless, the fact that he was still alive, that precluded the ability of Yaakov Avinu to actually have full consolation over the loss of his son.
Sha'al Hames Nig Zera Gezerah. Concerning the dead, they decreed a decree.
Meaning this is mean HaKadosh Baruch Hu in creating the human psychology, right? So he made it that a person will eventually come to forget and not dwell on those who've passed on from this world. So Mishtachesh from a label, these goes as HaKadosh Baruch Hu's geyser on those who have passed on from this world, that they should be forgotten from the label. Meaning we don't dwell on thinking about people who have passed on to the next world.
So in other words, it's a kind of a miracle that we forget, and in this case, Hashem withholds the miracle. Therefore, we don't forget.
It's a miracle of sorts. It's a gezerah that we do forget. Otherwise, we would be preoccupied with constant thoughts about people who have passed on. So Kadosh Baruch Hu's intention is that we shouldn't dwell unnecessarily over people who have passed on, that they've had their time in this world and they've moved on to a better existence in the spiritual realms than we have in the physical world. And we were still in this physical world, so we have our things to take care of, and it shouldn't be distracting that we would spend too much time dwelling on those who've passed on. So therefore, we don't have we're not in a constant state of mourning over people who have passed on, meaning we follow the halachas, the 7 days, 30 days a year, then a yard site every year. And with that, we give honor and recognition to those who we loved and who loved us, and we fulfill our obligation. And with that, we can continue on with our lives and the things that Hashem wants us to do in these lives. Because during the time of Shiva, Shloshim, most of the first year as well, on the yard site, many of our normal activities are curtailed in terms of the laws, not only the laws, but also emotionally. Emotionally, we're not prepared to continue on with the normal existence and our normal daily routines when we suffer lo aleinu, a great loss. Right? It affects us emotionally, psychologically, physically as well. And people have to get over that. They needed the 7 days of Shiva, they need the 30 days also in the year's time. And then from time to time, a year, every time the year comes. So with that, we have the emotional and psychological outlets that Chazal have prescribed for us, which allow us to gently go through this period of transition of which accompanies the loss of a dear loved one. But otherwise, if Hashem didn't make it that we would forget and we would have the pain and the feeling of loss constantly, then we wouldn't be able to function properly. So Kadosh Baruch Hu makes a gezerah that after the proper time, we forget and we don't feel the pain and the loss of those people that we love after they've passed on. It goes after a period of time, and that's a gezerah from a Kadosh Baruch Hu. It's a kindness, a chesed that Kadosh Baruch Hu puts into the to our thought processes and our emotions. Yeah. But Yaakov Avinu, since Yaakov Avinu was not truly in mourning because Yosef was not truly dead, so he wasn't able to receive these and accept these consolations, and he wasn't in the spiritual frame of mind that he could accept the loss of Yosef, because he was somebody that's why it's very difficult for people when they don't know about people lost and things like this. They constantly, their thoughts are constantly dwelling on it because they don't know.
Okay, so a raid al bani, I will go down for my son. Kamo al bani, it's like Albany is like Albany.
Right.
The harbe el mishamshin b'lashon al, and it's frequent that el is used for al. El Shaul, because of Shaul. Ve'el base hadamim, because of his bloody house. El hilakach Aron ha-Elokim, because the Ark of God was taken. El mos miha, and because of the death of her father-in-law, Ve'isha, and her husband. Okay, so that's just all a bunch of grammatical stuff.
Right. Okay, good.
To the grave mourning, Avel She'olah, Kif Shuto, Kipashuto, Lashon Kever Hu. In its plain meaning, it's an expression of the grave.
Right. A reference to the grave. Right.
Be'evli ekaver, while still in mourning, I will be buried. Velo es nachem kol yemei, and not be consoled all my life.
Right. So Yaakov Avinu was saying here that he imagines himself his whole life being in mourning over Yosef, over the loss of Yosef, that he would not ever have any consolation over his loss.
V'mid rasho gei hinom, and its midrashic explanation is Gehenna. Siman ze haya samur biyadi mipi ha gevura. It's a sign Masur, I don't know.
It was given to me. I mean, Siman Zeh, I mean, Yaakov, this is like Yaakov Avinu speaking about himself. Siman Zeh Mosu Biyadi, Mipnia Gevur. This Siman means like a prophecy or a indication, right? There was an indication given to Yaakov Avinu by Kadosh Baruch Hu.
Im lo yamus echad mi banai b'chayai. That if none of my children die in my lifetime, muftach Ani she'eni ro'eh Gehinnom. Then I am assured I will not see Gehenna.
Right. So Yaakov Avinu had this indication from a Kodesh Baruch Hu that if all of his children would continue to be alive, right, so then he would be saved from even Roy Gehenna. He won't even see Gehenna, and certainly not enter Gehenna. Won't even see Gehenna, right? So that was something very, very shocking to Yaakov Avinu that he was now missing Yosef, apparently, and that means that he would not be spared this terrible visitation to at least the seeing of Gehenna. So he was very, very concerned about this.
So so this prophecy was given prior to the sale of Yosef.
Yes.
And now Yaakov is saying, since Yosef is dead, so that prophecy is not going to be true, or the prophecy which said I wouldn't see Gehenna if he was alive is now going to be a prophecy that says I will see Gehenna because he's not alive.
Apparently. Mm-hmm.
And therefore, that's why he's mourning, because he now realizes he's going to see Gehenna.
That could be part of his mourning. Yes, that's right.
So the plain meaning is that it's the grave.
Right.
And the midrashic meaning is that it's referring to this prophecy.
Correct.
Okay, so I have a question on the plain meaning. The midrashic meaning is very nice in terms of answering my question. But the plain meaning, my question is stronger, because apparently he is actually making a statement. It's one thing to say, well, he planned on following the halacha and ending the mourning after a year, but when that time came, he couldn't do it because Hashem had withdrawn the miracle that allows a person to forget. He couldn't forget, even though he wanted to, even though he was trying to. But this seems to be saying that he's making a statement. I intend. In fact, my English even says Yaakov's intent was that I will continue mourning until I die. So
right.
how can he have that intent, which is contrary to the Torah?
Since, right, I think that was partly answered in the previous part of the Rashi. Since there was no definitive evidence that he actually died, right? Meaning everything indicated that he was dead. That's what the brothers wanted to show, that he was not. He was eaten by a wild animal, right? Nevertheless, the question is still in doubt. Meaning, for example, let's say there were no witnesses. They didn't say that they never made a claim that they saw him being eaten by a lion or a tiger or something like that, right? So it's very similar to the case of agunas, right? That the Torah is very specific about the necessity of having proper testimony about the death of a person, especially when it comes to freeing up a woman to remarry, right? And circumstantial evidence is usually not enough, right? In general, we can't allow remarriages based on circumstantial evidence. You need to have aiding. So here there was no aiding, right? So Yaakov Avinu, understanding all these things, he knew that the circumstantial evidence indicated that Yosef was now dead. But nevertheless, there was no definitive proof that he was in fact dead. So therefore, he was in a state of suffolk, a doubt in terms of his actual status, in terms of Yosef, his whereabouts and his being alive in this world or not. So that was something that he could not allow himself to be comforted, and therefore he understood that he would be in a state of mourning, right, until his last days in this world.
I see. So what is the halacha for a woman? She wakes up in the morning and there's a knock on her door, and the police are there, and they say, we found this coat. Is this the coat of your husband? She says, yeah. She looks at it. She says, yes, there's something particularly distinctive about this coat that I can say for sure it's my husband's. It's covered in blood. And the police say, we're very sorry for your loss. Now, what does she do? Does she go into mourning, or does she not go into mourning?
Right. So again, even if you could do a blood check, even a DNA check of the blood, the fact that there's blood doesn't indicate necessarily that it was a death. All it indicates is that there was this bloodshed, but there doesn't indicate necessarily death.
Right. So she would not go into mourning.
That's a question. If there's strong circumstantial evidence, then possibly yes. But whether there's an actual chiyuv to go into mourning or not, I'm not sure.
And she would now be in a guna. I mean, assuming that he is dead, but he was eaten by an animal, by a wild animal, let's say.
Right.
And the remains were scattered, and other animals got to it. Whatever. We're never going to find the body.
Right.
So she stays in the guna for the rest of her life, correct?
And yeah, under very specific circumstances, sometimes they can develop a case where she would be allowed to marry, but it's very, very rare. I mean, there are many cases of this. There were in Soviet Russia, the KBG would come and steal husbands away from their families, and they'd be never saw again. They'd be sent to Siberia. They'd be sent into dungeons in Soviet Russia someplace, and they'd never be seen again. But there was no proof positive that they actually were killed.
Right. So, okay. So I see. All right. Can I ask another question from the earlier part of this, Rashi? Or do you want to move on?
Okay. Okay. You'll ask your question. If we can answer, we'll answer. If not, we'll save an answer for another time.
Okay. So this thing about the wives were Canaanites, Rev Nehemiah.
Right.
How does Rev Nehemiah reconcile this with the whole interchange between Abraham and Eliezer, where Abraham says to Eliezer, despite the fact that Eliezer was the head of his household and everything was under his control, and he was a Talmid Chacham, he says, "You're cursed, and I'm blessed."
Right.
So if Canaanites are all cursed, so how can Rev Nehemiah say that the brothers married Canaanites?
Right. So there is discussion about this. There are those that say that it was really only a specific strictness that Avraham held for himself, right, and for his son Yitzchak, but it didn't follow through to the shiftei kar, to the brothers. Although there are others that say if you take just look at pasuk base in Lamed Ches, the next chapter, Lamed Ches pasuk base, talks about Yehuda. He went not married,
Right.
right? So you can read the pasuk here.
Um,
Pasuk base.
Vayar Sham Yehuda Bas Ish Kenaani Ushmo Shua. And Yehuda saw the daughter of a Canaanite man whose name was Shua. Vayikacheha Vayavo Eleha. And he took her and he married her.
Right. So look at the Rashi.
Kenani, Tagra, a merchant.
Right. Tiger is a merchant. The Lashon Kanani is also synonymous to being a merchant. So you see that Rashi and also the Targum are very careful that they want to say that he did not marry a Canaanite, right? Which would be in violation of the family tradition, right?
Right.
Right. So
Right. So this is my question.
right.
So
So
Rashi is saying he wasn't really a Canaanite?
right. It wasn't really there, right? She wasn't really a daughter of a Canaanite, right?
That's difficult to hear. I mean, it's clear. It says a Canaanite. I'm confused.
Well, so I mean, you can understand it as being not a Canaanite. Also means a merchant, right? Her father was a merchant, right? So the Ramban, right? The Ramban goes into a big discussion about this, right? It's a little bit more than we can do right now, but the answer to your question is in the Ramban on this pasuk.
So in other words, we could postulate that Reb Nehemiah, when he said they were Canaanites, he also didn't mean Mamish Canaanites. He meant they were local women.
It could be that there were women who were from their father. There were merchant people, but even if they do, there's discussion as to whether or not they actually married Canaanites or not. So that's okay. That's a separate point that it's worth discussing, but it'll take time to go into the differences of opinion about this.
All right, you have time for another question?
Okay. Yeah.
So this whole thing about in the beginning of the Rashi where it talks about the 22 years.
Right.
I've heard this before, but I've never understood. He went there under the instructions of his mother.
Right.
So he's doing kivud aim by being there. Now maybe you'll say the last 6 years he didn't have to stay and he's punished for that. I could hear that. But the first 14, he had to stay. He was working for his wives.
Right.
So how can he be punished? Why is he being punished for that?
I'm not sure if it's really to be considered a punishment. I'm not sure. Definitely you could understand it to be some type of a punishment, but then if that's the case, you'd have a question. Right? You'd have a question, if he's actually fulfilling his parents' wishes by going and leaving them. So that itself is a fulfillment of kibbud aveim. So nevertheless, even if it's not going to be viewed as a punishment, but the lack of having Yosef around, so that was obviously something which was very painful to Yaakov Avinu, And see, when we Kadosh Baruch, there's a Chazal say, which you're familiar with, Kadosh Baruch Hu is done the tzaddikim kekuta saira, right? The Kadosh Baruch Hu judges the tzaddikim with to a hair's breadth, meaning he's very, very strict in judging the tzaddikim in this world. So if anything, there was any slight infraction that occurred, right, they would be getting their punishments in this world, their sufferings in this world, in order that when they get to Olam Haba, they should be free to enjoy Olam Haba in the absolute complete sense. So even if he was fulfilling Kibbud Avim by going to Padan Aram and spending the 22 years there, nevertheless, the lack of his being fulfilling that mitzvah Kibbud Avim, there was some vacuum created by that. So whatever vacuum was created by the fact that Yaakov Avinu was not with his parents for those 22 years, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, with his wisdom, wanted to somehow give that vacuum a chance to dissipate in this world rather than to have it dissipate in the next world. So, yeah, these are the, again, I'm not sure you have to take it as a punishment. And even if you would take it as a punishment, you could understand it that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is simply allowing Yaakov Avinu to clear the slate in the best way possible in this world, rather than having any residue of slightest wrongdoings in the next world.
So just to clarify the wording of the Rashi, which it says V'sofi lil kos ke negdan. So in the end, lil kos does lil kos mean punish?
Let's see, I'm just let me, I want to just see it inside. Which pasuk are you reading the Rashi from?
34, the very end of the Rashi on 34. Right. So, right. So for Lilko, so he was going to get punished. He's going, in the end, he would get punished in equivalent to them. Yeah. So
Right.
What's the root of that word Lilkos?
That's from Malchus, from being punished.
Okay, so like to hit, to strike.
Right.
Okay.
So
All right, that answers my question. Okay, that's my questions. Thank you.
okay. Let's see, one more Rashi, the last point on the Rashi in the Lamed Hey.
Lamed Hey. His father. Vayef Oso Aviv. His father wept for him. Yitzchak. Bocher Haya Mipnei Tsaraso Shel Yaakov. Oh, his father wept for him is not Yaakov. His father wept for him. I will go down to the grave mourning for my son. His father wept for him.
Right.
So Yitzchak wept for Yaakov. Oh,
right.
That's interesting. Because Yaakov was suffering. Aval lo haya mis abel. But he did not mourn. That is, Yitzchak did not mourn.
Right.
Shehaya yodea shehu chai. That he knew that Yosef was alive.
Right.
How would he know that Yosef was alive?
Ruach HaKodesh. He had Ruach HaKodesh. Kadosh Baruch Hu allowed him to know that that Yosef was alive, right? So the basic question here is that that if Yitzchak Avinu, the father of Yaakov Avinu, knew that Yosef was alive, why didn't he tell him? Right? Why didn't he tell him?
Yeah.
He saw that that Yaakov was his own son was in mourning, crying, and Yitzchak was crying over the fact that his son was suffering so much, right? Because of the loss of the grandson. So he knew that the grandson was alive. So you would think the most logical, sensible thing would be to tell the father that don't worry, your son's alive. How do you know? He says, Kadosh Baruch Hu told me, I Ruach HaKodesh, right? So if Yitzchak told Yaakov that, he would believe without a doubt what is the words of his father, no?
Yeah, absolutely.
So the big question is why didn't Yaakov hear from Yitzchak? Why didn't Yitzchak tell Yaakov that his son is actually alive in Mitzrayim? So again, if we understand the premise that we're basing this on is that Yaakov was in doubt as to whether Yosef was alive or not, and Yitzchak knew definitively that Yaakov wasn't, that Yosef was in fact alive because he had Ruach HaKodesh, he had some type of a nevuah of some sort, because how else is he supposed to know, right? Don't forget, from the time of giving the brachas to Esav and Yaakov, right? When Yitzchak and Yaakov and Esav was, I think, 63 years old, he received the brachas. Yitzchak was already blind at that time, right? He was blind. And so for many, many years, Yitzchak was really, this has been 22 years after the brachas were given, right?
Right.
22, well, let's see, when Yosef was sold, that's not true. Once 22 years. He was 22 years in Padan Aram, 22 years in Padan Aram. So it's more than 22 years after the brachas were given. So Yitzchak Avinu had some prophecy which allowed him to see that Yosef was in fact alive. And there's a rule, you should know that when one prophet gets a prophecy, all other prophets also get the same prophecy. They get the same prophecy, but it's known to them that it's not a prophecy that they're supposed to relate to others, meaning they understand that this is a prophecy, communication from God to all prophets, and they therefore allow, and they're supposed to allow the true prophet that's supposed to reveal this to people to say it. So Yitzchak Avinu had a prophecy, and he understood clearly that Yosef was alive in Mitzrayim, and he understood that if Yaakov Avinu didn't get this prophecy, HaKadosh Baruch Hu was intending not to let him know. So if Yitzchak understood that the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu was that Yaakov was not supposed to know that Yosef is in Mitzrayim, so it would be forbidden for Yitzchak to tell him. Many times we think that we have to be proactive, we have to get involved, we have to do things. But the Avos understood that the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu works this world is much better and infinitely more wise than we could ever do and imagine on our own. So even though that there was a tremendous suffering that Yaakov Avinu was going through, Yitzchak Avinu would not dare tell him that Yosef was alive because he understood that was not the Hashgacha Pratis. That was not what HaKadosh Baruch Hu intended. That's a big lesson for us. Many times, again, we don't have prophecy. We're not on the level of the Avos, but nevertheless, it's a lesson for us. Sometimes we have to think at least twice before we get involved in doing something. Many times we think, obviously, full speed ahead, the Marines to the rescue. And sometimes we have to think twice and think, well, is this what Kadosh Baruch Hu really wants? Does Hashem really want me to get involved? We see here a perfect example when Yitzhak could very easily have gotten involved, and he chose not to, even though his son was going to go through 22 years of suffering over it. Right, so it's a very, very big lesson that this Rashi is telling us, teaching us that when we think that we're so right and positive that this is supposed to be done, we should maybe talk it over with someone, speak it out with a proper das Torah, see if this is actually the proper path that the Kadosh Baruch Hu wants us to take, and sometimes better than getting involved is better just let a Kadosh Baruch Hu let things run, and he can handle things much better than we can many times. Sometimes if we get involved, it can make things more difficult or even worse. So just something to keep in mind based on this Rashi. So, okay, I think our time's about up. And Yeseshev, I guess we'll continue Yeseshev on Sunday, which will be Erev Hanukkah, right? We should enjoy getting ready for Hanukkah. Yeseshev, don't forget when you're buying oil or dispensing your oil, you have a lot of oil there, you should it's better if you say it verbally that any oil that's left over, you want it to be able to be used for any purpose that you want. Shouldn't be considered to be oil which is set aside for the use of Hanukkah. So otherwise, you have to treat it with special kedusha, and you might have to burn it after Hanukkah and things like this. So when you dispersing your Hanukkah, buying your Hanukkah oil, say anything that's going to be left over will be used for any purposes I feel and want to use it for. Okay, everyone should have a good Erev Shabbos, and hope to see you all on Sunday.
All right. Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay.
Good Erev
Thank you all. Thank you.